So immigration is sort of the topic of the show, obviously, but it's not. As I was saying to you earlier, it's one of the things that we try to do is to just demystify immigration a bit and talk about the ways that it's not this strange thing. Like you were saying that how it's always characterized as the immigrant problem. Like, what are we going to do about this? This is a problem. We have immigrants coming here. How are we going to deal with them?
Yeah.
How are we going to solve these problems? So it's always looked at in terms, at least partially, as a problem. And I wonder, is that like a racial thing? Is that our hierarchy again? If we're talking about like a difference, hierarchy of difference, whatever that is, that's coming into play there, or is there another something else behind it?
I believe so. I mean, I think the real problem, if we really want to talk about it, is xenophobia and racism.
Ah, okay.
Right? But we can't plan for that, or we can't address that directly, you know? It becomes state intervention if we do something like that.
Yeah.
Right? So the immigration problem, even in the most sort of well-meaning person, if we frame it as a problem, then the solutions are going to be towards that, or it's going to be specifically geared to fixing that solution, right? And that never really addresses the root of the problem, right? It sort of shifts it, or sort of plays a little hand trick on us, where it's like, here's the problem.
Yeah.
Let's get the problem, but the problem's over here.
Well, yeah. That's certainly, like, if you want to, since this is a political season, like 9 out of 10 issues in politics are really just different understandings of what the problem is. It's not that the end result is necessarily all that different that people want. It's that what's causing the problem, and then how do you get there? And by the time you've started at different points and pointed in different directions, you're so far apart on where you're going to end up that it doesn't matter where you say you want to be in the end. Well, we want everybody in peace and harmony and, happy, and the American dream, all these kind of things that people talk about. But if you're diagnosing the problem differently, then your treatment's going to be different and your outcome's going to be different. So it's getting people to at least even sort of start talking about the same thing, going all the way back to what they identify as the issue that needs to be dealt with. So with immigration, how do we march back to that point from the beginning to where we're not thinking about it as a problem?
Yeah.
Or can we? Is that even possible?
I mean, it can, but it's a very political sort of move that you have to make. It's disrupting sort of the organization of our society, of the way we live. Right? It means challenging assumptions that have existed from the beginning of this country, and sort of taking a step back and sort of how are we going to address white supremacy? How do we address sort of these things that may seem very abstract and out of the way, but in a way they trickle down to everyday practices of planning in a department, it sort of makes the reason why I could say this on this radio station, but I can't say this on a commercial radio station, right? Right.
Because somebody would complain.
Yeah, exactly.
And it'd be like, well, that's kind of too political. You need to tone that down, right?
So what do you think about something also, again, that we've talked about in class, how immigrants are certain groups are now marketing them as economically valuable, right? So, I mean, I guess the optimistic person in me would say that can be useful, although it's a Band-Aid on a much larger systemic problem. But what if, say, that mindset translates, and the next generation starts thinking about immigrants in a positive light because, they bring money, and then hopefully the generation after that, I don't know why I'm speaking generations, but just as a timeline, eventually it translates to, well, we want them here to bring money, and I've gotten to know them, and I really like this person's culture, and they're actually good for our community in a bunch of other ways other than being economically valuable? Just what do you think about
Well,
that?
I think it's problematic to turn anybody
Yeah.
to see the value of any person in economic terms only,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, I think that's just problematic in general society. I mean, it doesn't even have to do with immigrants, just the way we see our relationships between each other in economic terms. I think that's
Yeah.
problematic,
Yeah.
right?
I agree with that.
Right. So instead of in the past, maybe immigration, especially when it was European immigration, right? It was how are we going to make these people, how are we going to make this group of people, these citizens, and right?
Yeah.
But that language of economic talks moves that conversation away from that citizenship, and it's more, what competitive advantage are they bringing our city, our downtown, or our state, or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that I don't think, yeah, I think I.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not saying I agree with it, but I was just wondering how you
Yeah.
would think.
Well,
about
it
that.
sort of starts at a problematic place because
Right.
you're saying, look at all these good things that these people bring to us. So you're starting from a point of us versus them. They are doing something good for us, so as opposed to they're doing something bad for us. But at the point where they want to become us, they stop doing something good for us and they start competing with us, and
Yeah.
then there's a problem. So and this has been since since the days of slavery a big issue with in terms of white people and versus African Americans is they've always there have been a group of white people who said, well, I think African Americans are people. They deserve the same rights as we do, but they're still operating as them and us. So out of that was born this idea of separate but equal facilities, and the whole Jim Crow thing came up with, like, sure, we'll be nice to them and give them stuff, but they're over here and we're over here. And as soon as this mixing started, that's when people were like, oh no, wait, that can't happen. It's an us versus them. So anytime you think of people that way, you're automatically setting up something, this barrier that's hard to get around, even if it's like, hey, these people are good for us, which sort of brings me to this weird thought that I'm not sure how to articulate, but part of the issue is, like, immigrants are different and they bring different languages and religions and food and whatever. Well, we like the food, but everything else is different. And it makes me wonder anyway, like, what could you point to about quote unquote American culture that is distinctive to and originated in the landmass that we call the United States? Like, what is it that didn't come from somewhere else and sort of turn into something? I can't think of anything that's strictly American. People will talk about, entrepreneurship. Well, that's bogus. That a lot of people have that. All the different things, like, well, we have more entrepreneurship, or we're more adventurous than, or whatever. But that's nonsense. None of those things are distinctly American culture. So I'm not sure what it is that people are trying to defend when they defend our way of life. What are they even talking about? I don't even know. It's weird when you start thinking about it. Like the cuisine, not really. Politics, no, that mostly comes from English common law. Styles. I mean, we've evolved into things like media is a big export. U.S. culture is exported by way of movies and TV and that kind of thing, probably more than any other single thing that we do. There's not much that we make here that we send to other countries. Fashion, but all those things are sold through media. So media is our big export, really, as far as I can tell. And whatever
Which
is
isn't unique to us either, though.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's just it's developing into, maybe over another 100 years or so, eventually there'll be something that's so distinctly American that you can say, well, you won't find that anywhere else. But blues came from other things, jazz came from other things. There's a lot of African influence, there's a lot of Mediterranean influence, and all those things. So I don't know.
I've heard Native American food is making that's not really meant to be a real comment, but I have heard that there's some restaurants
there are
opening up that are catered to Native
some
American
cuisine,
foods,
which
that would be uniquely.
Which is interesting. My ex is Native American, and I spent many years, going to her reservation and doing things. And I'll tell you, the food it's very limited. It's not. It's not like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I mean, it's just it's basically based around what's available in certain places. So in this area there were wild turnips and a certain berry and this kind of game, and that's pretty much it. And so that's been a really interesting thing for me to watch, because what they're coming up with versus where it came from is just so different. It's like, okay, this is Native American cuisine in what sense? You actually included buffalo instead of beef. All right, that's something. Or wild turnips instead of potatoes. Or it's just kind of in name only, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's not really Native American cuisine. Yeah. For what it's worth. But anyway, nobody cares about that. Yeah. It's getting off track, I guess. All right, so I have to get back on track, right? So we need to talk about immigration. Well, we don't have to talk about. You're wearing a GEO shirt. Tell me about the GEO. All right, what are you guys up to these days?
Well, I'm on the Solidarity Committee.
Oh, right.
So, there's a bunch of events that we've recently sort of attached ourselves to, ranging from little small just protest on campus to we wrote a letter. Speaking of Native Americans, we wrote I guess the larger labor union that we're under released a statement in favor of the pipeline.
Yeah, AFL-CIO did, I think.
So we sort of responded to that, sort of denouncing their move. I mean, there's always stuff going on in there. I've only been in officially a few weeks, so
okay.
So I don't know too much right now.
Well, it's interesting. The Immigration Forum has a similar problem, though. So everybody comes to us and says, "Oh, we want you to sign on to our, thing." And I've been pushing for a while now to be careful about things like that, because I think you can end up sort of diluting yourself to the point where you don't really have an identity anymore. I've really appreciated GEO's solidarity movement, because they really, they attach themselves to things, and there's a lot of thought that goes into it. But it's really easy when you've got an organization or a name to start just being pulled into things like, co-sign this and, co-sponsor that. And you're like, oh, sure, I like you, so I'll do that. And without thinking, like, what does it say about our core message? We could learn a few things from you guys in how you go about doing that, because it's tricky. It's really tricky. And the pipeline thing was actually something that came up that we talked about, and people were saying, well, you should say something about this. And it's like, well, how does that have anything to do with immigration? And I was having a hard time. So some people were saying, well, it's a lot of pollution happens on immigrant and marginalized communities that tend to be overly polluted places, and all that kind of thing. There's a lot of ways, like, it's sort of torturous, but you can sort of get there. But I was just feeling like I'm not sure what this says, other than that we just become increasingly more apt to be a liberal group that signs on to liberal causes and agrees with them because we personally agree with them, not because our organization has anything to do with that topic. Yeah. So makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah. But in a sense, isn't that solidarity, right? So even if you don't directly have stakes in it, even though I could argue that you do with the pipeline.
Well, I would like to hear that argument, because I've thought about it a couple of different ways, and to me it seemed like a just step
Well, I mean, because I think, I mean, I don't know the exact demographics of the radio station or in general, right? But I think the more attention that you as a radio host can make towards a particular movement, right? Most likely you would, based on or I'm assuming on your demographics, would also, okay, this radio station's doing this too, like, you know, let's hear what they have to say. But also, I mean, it's just a letter of statement, right? That's all they were asking for, or like to say something. There was no like material, like material backing.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't even see the issue of doing it or how it would dilute the message. What message?
That we're a nonpartisan organization to begin with, that one seeks to make this area more immigrant friendly and inclusive for immigrants.
Oh, okay, so
that's our function. Is Immigration Forum began as a group of individuals who were all in various ways working on the topic of immigration.
Yeah.
So most of us were immigrants or have immigrant relatives. I'm a second generation immigrant, so throughout my life I've always, in one way or another, had to deal with stuff like somebody call me up like, how do I fill out this form and how do I do this, you know, all this kind of stuff. So we were all just doing that for friends and family. And we decided at some point, well, let's get together, because it seems like we're trading information one-on-one, but you're telling me something and you might need to know that, but you don't know it because I didn't think to tell you and you didn't think to ask me. So let's all get together monthly and just share information. And so we started doing that, and then over time that kind of evolved into like, well, we've got this group, we can do things, we can actually, you know.
So with that said, so whose land was this originally?
Indigenous American.
Okay, so
yeah.
So I think there is all immigrants, including settlers that came here and pillaged the land,
right,
owe some debt to
they do
to them. So I mean, I think it's reciprocal, I think, right? So the immigration is fighting for immigrations, right?
Yeah.
Immigration to this particular place, right?
Uh-huh.
And I think it would erase history, it'd erase everything if the Immigration Forum didn't support the people whose land it originally was.
Okay. I'll accept that. I'm still not entirely sure, but yeah, okay. I mean, I don't see it as counter to our message. It just didn't seem to be something that like followed naturally from what we did.
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of indigenous or Native American people in Arizona, for example, that have protested the building of the borders, protested the sheriff, what's his name? Arpaio, right? In the name that this was our land and we didn't have these borders.
Right.
And these people are probably the people that are immigrating from, say, Central and Central America and Mexico probably are somewhat sort of connected to the original indigenous people here, right? And those borders, there wasn't borders before.
Right. Yeah. That's true. Well, and I think environmental issues are everyone's issue too. Yeah. So in that sense, I agree with it. I don't know. It was a question that came up. I don't know where it was resolved, but I know as the person who's tasked with writing these statements, I have to feel like I have something to say. You know, that I have to feel it. I can't just like Immigration Forum, blah blah blah. Yeah, you know, I can't just poke in names and fill it out. It has to come from some place where I really see something. I suppose it doesn't have to. If I were a better writer, I could just throw down a bunch of words and just, there you go. Take it or leave it, but I'm not that good. Anyway, we're sort of approaching, I can't even talk, approaching the end part of the show. Was there anything you were wanting to say that you haven't gotten to say yet?
Daniel didn't talk about his project.
Did I?
No.
Or that was off air. Right?
Oh, yeah, I guess we did. Well, tell me more about your project.
So I guess we kind of hinted on it a little bit earlier. My project was looking at the language that surrounds immigrants
Yeah.
and how that plays a role into how both in policy, sort of what Francisco was looking at, sort of how that language of good and bad immigrant, like for example, the immigrant that worked in the planning department, right? They were probably most likely skilled, educated. They played that role of the good immigrant.
Good immigrant, yeah.
Right? And they were incorporated into the planning process, but there was
Right.
no actual institutional way to incorporate what's considered, I'm using quotes, so
Right.
I know you can't see
Air
but-
quotes. I know,
yeah.
I do that all the time.
Right? But that's what plays the role of, or what about the role of the bad immigrant, right? So the immigrant that we say is illegal or
Right.
or uneducated or a low wage worker, right? Seeing how that sort of, even though the planning process is or there's claims that the planning process is inclusive, right? And maybe it is including
Yeah.
a certain type of immigrant, right? But is it inclusive to the other immigrants? I mean, that's just an example. The everyday, like, yeah. So, I mean, I'm not trying to throw them under the bus because I don't know the specifics, but as an example, right? So I sort of looked at that, how that language plays into the role of both the planning processes and then how do different groups of immigrants. So I interviewed two groups, like students, highly educated students getting their
Right.
PhD,
Right.
and their experiences as an immigrant here. And then I compared that to just regular people that worked at washing dishes,
Right.
and how that language affects, or how that how they sort of internalize that language.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess, to be fair, your example of someone being treated well was a more personal thing than it was. We are taking immigrants into account with our planning. It was more like we're being accessible to you and flexible with you. You are an immigrant and we're helping you in this and we're getting help from you. But that doesn't necessarily translate down the line to the people in the community who may need.
Not necessarily, but the a man who I spoke to, who's also an immigrant in the planning department, he even brought up the fact that he feels he's in a unique position because he lives in an area that is a lot of other immigrants, and he has this position kind of power, I guess, in the planning department. But he'll go and he'll make a specific point to bring to his church and his neighbors to raise their awareness of the fact that a public meeting is going to be happening and they should be there if they want to voice their concerns. So I think, in a way, I mean, maybe that's just a very isolated case, but ideally that kind of thing could be replicated across the board.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good thing. I'm still impressed
Yeah,
by it. I'm
but-
Yeah, I
just
still think it's a good thing too.
sort of pointing out that
Yeah, there's a
it
difference.
it doesn't necessarily, like, there's always people that are allowed in to the upper levels who are, usually because they fit there, and they fit there because they don't challenge the status quo, they support it.
Yeah.
And so it's a little different thing. But so did you come to any conclusions on
No, it was
that?
just more exploring
It's just-
that. It was more exploring that language. I mean, it was a month-long project. There's not
Right.
much I could
Oh, okay.
solidify or concretely claim, So it was just more looking at how these things influence each other.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So, why did you take this class? I guess I should ask that. Why did you take this class?
I haven't had any formal exposure to immigration issues, other than just kind of personal observation. I'm from a neighborhood in Chicago that is very heavily populated by immigrants. So I've always been interested in how immigrants' experiences in their communities, but never had the opportunity to formally learn about it. So
For me, an important aspect of my studies in general is studying planners, and especially how they handle difference or race or immigration, how they how that comes into their practice. So it's I'm taking it more on a study of planners, or to study planners,
Observing
right? Planning
us.
theories, rather
Ah.
than sort of the immigration per se.
Uh-huh.
Right? So,
So you're studying her.
well, a little bit. I mean, if I
How
was,
do you feel? You're an object of study.
Yeah, I'm making them the problem rather
Yeah.
than immigration.
Planners are the problem.
No, I'm just.
Yeah. No, I just always interested in that because people arrive at this in different ways. Some people are just like, well, I don't know, it's kind of interesting, you know, and they just don't really have a reason. Some people have very personal, like, life histories that, you know, well, I'm an immigrant, or in my case, I'm second generation immigrant. So to me, it's like, it's always been an interesting subject because I've never felt, you know, I've always read about and looked at Americans, and I know that's in improper terms, people from the U.S., not Americans, because it's North and South America. But they like calling themselves Americans. Anyway, throughout my life, even when I was really young and did not consciously think of myself as being different, I always looked at Americans as something different from me. I didn't think of it as us. I thought of it as them. And I don't know where I got that from. That was not taught to me in any explicit way. It may have been taught in all sorts of subconscious ways that I was not aware of, but I just remember, and it was always very interesting to me. It was like, well, I keep wanting to say they do this, Americans do this.
Even though you were born here.
Yeah, I was born here, but I never felt, and it was just because I didn't really fit in. I'd go to my friends' houses, go to events, and it was just like, I don't know why they're doing this. I don't understand this custom. I don't understand this way of thinking. And, you know, I was born here. So how many generations does that exist? How long does that last before you go, oh, I am one of us. I am one of them. You know, they are me, or we, or however you put it. And, you know, that's just always fascinated me. It's a question I've never been able to answer because different people answer it in different ways. Some people go, oh, I feel, you know, feel like I'm a part of it, and they just got here, and other people, you know, 3-4 generations in, they don't feel like it. So I don't know that there's any single answer to that, but it's just always been an interesting question to me.
And you still feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel that way too. I mean, in my family, it's like I'm second generation as well. I don't think. I mean, I just gave up on sort of being accepted on their terms,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So now I'm more interested in changing those terms than trying to fit myself within that. I mean, I don't want to be that anyways, or at least the way they organize and the way they set it up now,
Right.
right?
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean. I did go through a period where I really wanted to fit in,
Yeah.
and I could not find a way to do it. I could never quite do it. And I don't, you know, phenotype, it's just ambiguous. You look at me and you're like, I don't know, like
Maybe
it could be, you know,
he's ish.
yeah. It's just, of course, I'm fading as I get older. That's a weird thing too. That's a whole other topic. But you just sort of fade. I don't know. I mean, I used to be darker and have really black hair. You know, I just had a more like distinctively not quite obviously white look, but it wasn't, you know, as vague as it is now.